The signal came without warning. It arrived at every listening post, every communications hub, every satellite across the known galaxy at exactly the same moment. The transmission was old, so old that most civilizations hadn't even existed when it was first sent into the void. 80,000 years. That's how long the message had traveled through space, buried in cosmic noise, waiting for someone to hear it. On station, the massive wheel-shaped structure that housed the Galactic Council, alarms went off in 12 different languages. Ambassador Wu was in his quarters, reviewing reports from Earth, when his communication device started flashing. The message was simple enough that even the most basic translation software could decode it. Coordinates, a mathematical proof showing intelligence, and a plea, "Help us please, we are dying." Within hours, the council chamber filled with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Wu took his seat in the human section, a modest area compared to the grand platforms occupied by the elder races. He watched as the chamber buzzed with activity, voices overlapping, translation devices humming, holographic displays showing the signal's origin point. The representative spoke first. There were ancient beings made of living silicon, their bodies like walking crystals that refracted light in strange ways. They had existed for 50,000 years and considered themselves the species in the galaxy. "This signal is clearly a trap," they said, its voice like wind through stone. "No civilization could survive 80,000 years waiting for rescue. This is either an automated system or a lure designed by hostiles." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The representative, a being of pure energy contained in a specialized suit, added its own concerns. "Our calculations show the coordinates lead to a region of extreme gravitational instability. Any ship traveling there would face a 73% chance of destruction. The risk is unacceptable." More voices joined in. The creatures with compound eyes and chittering mandibles displayed their star charts. "We have mapped every sector of known space. This region is marked as hazardous. No settlements exist there. Whatever sent this signal is long dead." The debate continued for hours, then days, then weeks. Philosophers from a dozen species discussed the ethics of responding to extinct civilizations. Scientists calculated probabilities and analyzed risk factors. Military strategists warned about unknown dangers lurking in uncharted space. Wu listened to everything. He took careful notes, asked clarifying questions when needed, and said very little. The other ambassadors seemed relieved by this. Humans were still new to the galactic community, barely 300 years since first contact. It was better when they stayed quiet and learned from their elders. After a month of debate, the council reached its conclusion. The signal would be logged, studied, and ultimately ignored. The risk outweighed any potential benefit. The ambassador summarized the decision. "We honor the memory of those who sent this message, but we cannot justify endangering living beings for those who are already gone." Wu nodded politely, thanked the council for their time, and returned to his quarters. He drafted his report carefully, including every argument and calculation the council had made. Then he sent it directly to Earth, to Commander De at the Human Expeditionary Fleet headquarters. The reply came back in less than 6 hours. 3 words: "Prepare the ship." De didn't need weeks of debate. She didn't need probability calculations or risk assessments. Someone had asked for help. That was enough. The HSS Persistence was docked at a human outpost near Earth's moon. It was a deep space rescue vessel, built specifically for impossible situations. Its hull was reinforced against radiation. Its engines could punch through gravity wells that would crush normal ships, and its cargo hold was designed to carry survivors back from the edge of the galaxy. Captain 1 received her orders while training new recruits on emergency procedures. She was in her 40s, with gray streaking her tied-back hair and the kind of calm presence that made people trust her instantly. She'd spent 20 years in space, including 5 years in the outer belt colonies, where life support failures were common and rescue missions were a daily occurrence. She read the mission brief once, then called her senior staff together. "We're going after the signal," she said simply. "Volunteers only. It's going to be dangerous and we might not come back." Engineer Bora was the first to step forward. She was younger than one, with oil-stained hands and a tendency to hum old Korean folk songs while she worked. "The ship needs someone who knows her systems," she said. "I'm in." Linguist Yang nodded next. He was quiet and thoughtful, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. "If there are survivors, they'll need someone who can communicate. I'll go." Medical Officer Sung-min signed on without hesitation. He'd been with one for a decade, ever since they'd pulled survivors from a crashed mining vessel in the asteroid belt. "Someone's going to need medical attention," he said. "Might as well be me providing it." Within 72 hours, the Persistence was ready. The crew loaded supplies, ran system checks, and plotted their course to the coordinates that had frightened the entire Galactic Council. News of the launch spread quickly through communication channels. Back on station, Wu faced a barrage of questions from other ambassadors. They couldn't understand it. Why would humans risk everything for a signal 80,000 years old? What strategic advantage did Earth see? What intelligence did they have that suggested success? The ambassador confronted him directly. "This is madness. Your species is committing resources and lives to a statistically impossible rescue. Explain your logic." Wu looked at the ancient crystalline being and tried to find words that would translate properly. "We received a distress call," he said slowly. "Someone asked for help. What else would we do?" They stared at him for a long moment. "You would do nothing. The logical choice is to do nothing. The safe choice is to do nothing." "Maybe," Wu said, "but they asked, and we can try, so we will." The concept didn't seem to translate well. They walked away, muttering about human irrationality. Similar conversations happened with and a dozen other species. None of them understood. They kept searching for hidden motives, secret calculations, strategic advantages that humans must have identified. But there were none. The truth was simpler than any of them could accept. The Persistence launched from the human outpost with a crew of 23. Captain 1 sat in the command chair, watching the stars stretch into lines as they entered faster-than-light travel. Bora monitored the engines from her station, making constant adjustments. Yang studied what little data they had about the signal's origin. Sung-min prepared the medical bay for anything. None of them talked about the dangers ahead. None of them questioned whether this was the right choice. They had their mission, and that was enough. Back on station, several Council species launched stealth observation drones to follow the human ship. They told themselves it was for scientific purposes, to study human decision-making under pressure, to gather data about the hazardous region, to understand this strange species better. But really, they were curious. Curious about beings who would travel across the galaxy for strangers who might be dead. Curious about a species that didn't seem to calculate odds the way everyone else did. The Persistence jumped deeper into uncharted space, leaving the civilized galaxy behind. And the galaxy watched, confused and fascinated, as humanity did what it always did. Someone asked for help, so humans simply responded. The edge of known space looked different than one expected. There was no clear boundary, no warning sign marking where civilization ended. The stars simply became stranger, their colors shifted wrong, their positions didn't match any chart, and the space between them felt heavier somehow. "Entering the hazard zone," Bora called from her engineering station. Her fingers danced across the controls, adjusting shield frequencies to match the shifting gravitational fields. "It's going to get rough." The Persistence shuddered as it pushed deeper into the region that had frightened the Galactic Council. Dark matter clouds swirled like oil in water, making sensors scream with false readings. Gravitational riptides pulled at the ship from multiple directions at once, trying to tear it apart. One gripped her command chair and watched the. She'd flown through asteroid fields, navigated solar storms, and once threaded a ship through a collapsing wormhole. This was worse than all of them combined, but the coordinates were still ahead and the mission was clear. "How are the engines holding?" she asked. "Better than expected," Bora said, then added with a slight smile, "I may have made some modifications before we left. Unauthorized modifications." "I'll pretend I didn't hear that." "Appreciate it, Captain." The crew fell into a routine despite the danger. Every 6 hours they rotated shifts. Every 12 hours they gathered in the mess hall for meals. Sungmin maintained the small hydroponics bay where they grew vegetables, tomatoes, lettuce, and peppers that reminded them of Earth. The plants seemed absurdly fragile in a ship traveling through cosmic chaos, but somehow that made them more important. On the third day, Yang made a discovery. He'd been analyzing older fragments of the distress signal, pieces that had been corrupted or incomplete. "I found something," he said, calling the senior staff to his workstation. "Listen to this." He played a cleaned-up section of the transmission. Beneath the mathematical proofs and coordinates was something else, a sound like music, or maybe crying, or perhaps both. It lasted only a few seconds before dissolving back into static. "What is it?" one asked. "I think it's emotion," Yang said quietly. "Raw emotion encoded into the signal. Whoever sent this wasn't just asking for help. They were begging. They were terrified." The crew stood in silence for a moment. Then Bora returned to her station without a word, and Sungmin went back to checking medical supplies. There was nothing to discuss. They were already going as fast as they could. What the crew didn't know was that they weren't alone. Several council species had launched stealth observation drones to follow the persistence into the hazard zone. The drones were small, automated, and nearly invisible to sensors. They watched everything. They had sent their drones to study human decision-making under existential threat. They wanted to understand how humans processed fear, how they handled impossible odds, how they justified continuing when logic said to quit. But what the drones recorded confused the observers. The humans didn't seem afraid. One made her decisions with calm precision. Bora sang while repairing damaged systems, old songs from Earth that the translation software couldn't properly decode. The crew shared meals and told stories and laughed at jokes. "They don't understand the danger," one scientist concluded. "They understand perfectly," another argued. "Look at their preparations. They know exactly how bad this is. They're just choosing to continue anyway." The drones focused on mapping the hazards and calculating survival probabilities. Every new spatial anomaly decreased the persistence's chances of survival. Every gravitational wave that slammed into the ship's shields brought them closer to catastrophic failure. The math was clear. The humans should turn back. Yet they didn't. The observers watched one plot courses through dangers that should be impossible to navigate. They watched Bora push the engines beyond their rated capacity. They watched the crew work with efficiency that spoke of absolute trust in each other. "Fascinating," the research team noted. "They appear to be experiencing satisfaction despite the circumstances." On the seventh day, the Persistence encountered something that made even one pause. A massive gravitational distortion blocked their path, a wound in space itself where reality seemed to fold inward. Sensors couldn't measure its size. Navigation computers couldn't plot a course around it. "That's new," Bora said, staring at her readouts. "That's very, very new and very, very bad." One studied the phenomenon. They could try to go around, but that would add weeks to their journey. Assuming the distortion didn't expand, assuming their supplies lasted, assuming the ship held together. Too many assumptions. "Can we go through it?" she asked. Bora was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe, probably not, but maybe." What would we need? I'd have to divert all non-essential power to the shields. Life support, artificial gravity, even some of the sensors. We'd be flying blind in a tin can, hoping the shields don't collapse. One looked at her crew. Yang met her eyes and nodded. Sungmin gave a slight shrug that meant he trusted her judgment. The other crew members at their stations showed no sign of protest. Do it, one said. The next 6 hours were the longest of their journey. The ship went dark except for emergency lighting. Gravity disappeared, leaving everyone floating. The temperature dropped as heating systems shut down. They strapped into their stations and held on as Bora carefully, slowly, pushed the Persistence into the gravitational anomaly. The ship screamed. Metal groaned under forces it was never designed to handle. Shields flickered and sparked. Several crew members got sick in zero gravity, and Sungmin floated through the ship distributing medication and calm words. Through it all, one sat in her command chair, now floating in zero gravity, and watched the few instruments still functioning. Her hands were steady on the controls, making tiny corrections to keep them on course. She'd been flying ships for 20 years. She knew every sound the Persistence made, every vibration that meant trouble. Shields at 40%, Bora called out, her voice strained. 35%, 30. Hold together, one whispered to the ship. Just hold together. The Persistence emerged on the other side 17 minutes later. Systems came back online one by one. Gravity returned, dropping people back into their seats. The cleared, showing normal space again, or at least as normal as this region got. Status report, one said. Shields regenerating, Bora said, sounding exhausted. Hull integrity at 92%. Engines are good, we're good, we made it. Cheers erupted across the ship. Not loud celebrations, they were too tired for that, but quiet sounds of relief and satisfaction. They'd done something impossible, and they'd done it together. The observation drones recorded all of it. The scientists played the footage over and over, trying to understand. The humans had faced certain death and somehow pushed through. They'd trusted each other without question. They'd risked everything and treated it like just another day at work. This is not normal behavior, the lead researcher reported to their government. This species operates outside expected parameters. Recommendation, the government official asked. Continued observation, we need more data. On the 14th day, the Persistence reached the coordinates. Yang saw it first on long-range sensors and couldn't believe what he was seeing. Captain, he said slowly, you need to see this. One came to his station and stared at the display. There, floating in the void, was a structure. It was massive beyond comprehension, kilometers across, maybe larger. Its architecture made no sense, with angles that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the eye could process. It shouldn't be possible. The gravitational forces in this region should have torn it apart millions of years ago. Yet there it was, ancient damage but still intact, still present, still waiting. Scan for life signs, one ordered. Yang worked his controls, then looked up with wide eyes. I'm reading something, deep inside the structure. It's faint, but it's there. Something is alive in there. The crew of the Persistence looked at each other. They'd traveled across the galaxy, through dangers that had killed ships and crews before. They'd pushed their vessel to its limits and beyond, and they'd found what the Galactic Council said was impossible. Survivors. After 80,000 years, something still lived inside that ancient station. One took a breath, then gave the order they'd come all this way to give. Prepare docking procedures, we're going in. The docking procedure took 3 hours. The ancient station's airlocks didn't match any standard design, and its hull material was something Bora had never encountered. She had to jury-rig an adapter using spare parts and what she called creative engineering. One called it controlled chaos, but she trusted Bora's instincts. When the seal finally locked and pressure equalized, one selected her team. Bora would come for technical support. Sungmin would handle any medical situations, and Yang would attempt communication if they found anyone alive. 4 others joined them, security officers trained for unknown environments. Remember, one told her team as they suited up, this place has been drifting in space for 80,000 years. Watch your step, watch your air supply, and watch each other. They cycled through the airlock and entered the ancient station. The difference was immediate. The persistence was modern, clean, and well lit. This place was a tomb. Emergency lights flickered in patterns that hurt to look at. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to shift when observed directly. The geometry was wrong, corridors that looked straight but felt like they curved, and distances that changed depending on where you stood. Radiation levels are elevated but manageable, Sungmin reported, checking his scanner. There's atmosphere, but it's not breathable. Keep your suits sealed. They moved deeper into the station, following a trail of emergency beacons. Each beacon was ancient beyond measure, power sources that should have died ago still pulsing with faint light. The beacons led them through corridors that seemed to go on forever, past rooms filled with technology they couldn't begin to understand. Yang stopped at one of the symbols on the wall. He studied it for a long moment, his translation device working to decode patterns 80,000 years old. I think this is a warning, he said, or maybe directions. The language is so old that my software barely recognizes it as language at all. What's it saying? One asked. Something about hope or waiting. The concepts don't translate well. He paused. I think they knew someone might come. They left instructions for rescuers. The team continued forward. The deeper they went, the more obvious the station's age became. Entire sections had failed, collapsed corridors, sealed chambers, areas open to vacuum. Yet somehow the core system still functioned. Power still flowed to the emergency beacons. Life support still operated in sealed sections. Whatever built this station knew what they were doing, Boras said with professional appreciation. This is engineering beyond anything the Council has. This should have failed thousands of years ago. They reached a massive sealed door near what sensors indicated was the station's core. The symbols here were different, more urgent, more desperate. Yang's translation device struggled with them, producing fragments. Last, refuge, wait, hope, please. This is it, one said quietly. Whatever we came to find is behind that door. Bora examined the locking mechanism. It was complex, but it was also designed to be opened, eventually by someone. She worked carefully, routing power from their portable generator to the ancient systems. Lights flickered. Something deep in the station's machinery hummed to life. The door opened slowly, revealing a chamber beyond. The team entered carefully, lights from their suits cutting through the darkness. The room was large, filled with equipment they didn't recognize, and in the center, on platforms that might have been beds or stasis chambers, were 3 figures. They looked like living crystals, geometric patterns that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. Their bodies were dim, barely glowing with internal light. They were completely still. Are they alive? One asked. Sungmin moved forward with his medical scanner, adapting it as best he could for alien biology. I'm reading energy signatures, very faint but present. They're in some kind of deep stasis. He looked up. Captain, I think they've been like this for a very long time. Yang found a control panel covered in symbols. His translation device worked faster now, having learned from the patterns they'd seen earlier. There are logs here, records. I'm trying to. He went quiet, reading. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. This was an arc. They were fleeing something, a disaster that consumed their entire civilization. They sent out the distress call and waited for rescue. 80,000 years, Bora whispered. They've been waiting for 80,000 years. More than that, Yang continued reading. The logs show they stayed awake for decades first, then centuries. They waited and maintained the station and kept the signal broadcasting, but slowly they started dying. The stasis systems were failing. These three are the last survivors. The system kept them alive by. He stopped, struggling with the translation. By hopping. The AI system here is so advanced that it learned to hope. It kept them alive through probability and willpower, because it believed someone would come. One felt something catch in her throat. She looked at the three crystalline beings, dim and fatting, who had waited for rescue longer than human civilization had existed. Can we wake them? Sung Min examined the stasis systems. Maybe, but I don't know what it will do to them. If we're wrong, if I make a mistake. They've been dying slowly for 80,000 years, one said. Whatever we do, it's better than that. Bora and Sung Min worked together, studying the alien systems and carefully introducing power to the stasis chambers. Lights began to glow brighter. The crystalline beings started to emit soft sounds like chimes in the wind. One of them, larger than the others and covered in patterns that suggested great age, began to brighten. The being's eyes opened. They were like looking into galaxies deep and old and full of stars. Slowly, with obvious effort, it moved. A hand lifted. A voice emerged, speaking in frequencies that made Yang's translation device crackle. You came. The words were simple but carried weight beyond their meaning. Disbelief, wonder, hope. Yang activated his translation program, letting it adjust to the being's language. Yes, he said, we came. We received your signal. The crystalline being, what Yang's device translated as Keeper of Hope, stared at them. Its light pulsed in patterns that might have been emotion. How long? 80,000 years since you sent the signal. The Keeper's light dimmed for a moment. So long, we thought. We calculated that no one would come. The probability was too low, the risk too high. We believed we would die here, waiting forever. You weren't wrong about the risk, one said, but we came anyway. Why? It was such a simple question, but one struggled to answer it in a way that would translate properly. Because you asked for help. That is all. No political gain, no resource acquisition, no strategic advantage. That's all, one confirmed. The Keeper of Hope was silent for a long time. Its light pulsed in complex patterns as it processed this information. Finally, it spoke again. Your species is very strange. We get that a lot, Bora said with a slight smile. Sung Min worked on the other two stasis chambers while Bora assessed the station's condition. The news wasn't good. This place is dying, she reported. The core systems are failing. Whatever's been keeping it together for 80 is finally giving up. We have maybe hours before critical systems collapse. Can we move them? One asked. If we're careful, Sung Min said. But they're extremely fragile. The stasis has kept them alive, but barely. Moving them is risky. Staying here is more risky, one pointed out. The Keeper of Hope managed something that might have been a laugh, a sound like crystal bells. You travel across the galaxy to save strangers, then worry about risk in moving us. Your species is very, very strange. The evacuation took 2 hours. They carefully transported the three, as Yang learned their species was called, to the Persistence. Sung Min converted an entire cargo bay into a specialized medical ward, using everything he knew about human medicine and adapting it for crystalline biology. It was improvised and experimental, but it was better than the failing systems on the ancient station. Bora made one last trip to the station's core. She couldn't save the entire structure, but she could download the logs and records, 80,000 years of history, science, and culture from a civilization the galaxy had forgotten. She worked as fast as she could while the station groaned and shuddered around her. When she returned to the Persistence, one gave the order to undock. They pulled away from the ancient ark just as its power core finally failed. The structure collapsed slowly, gracefully, folding in on itself like a dying flower. It had served its purpose. It had kept its passengers alive long enough for rescue to arrive. In the medical bay, the Keeper of Hope watched through a viewport as its home of 80,000 years disappeared into the void. Yang stood nearby, giving the ancient being space to mourn. "We thought no one would come," the keeper said quietly. "We calculated every species that might receive our signal. We analyzed their cultures, their psychology, their evolutionary drives. Every calculation said the same thing: the risk would be too great, the reward too uncertain. No species would come." "What changed?" Yang asked. "Humans," the keeper said simply. "Humans don't calculate like others do. You don't weigh risk and reward, you simply respond." Yang smiled. "Someone needed help. What else would we do?" The keeper's light pulsed in patterns that Yang's translation device labeled as profound confusion mixed with gratitude. It was an odd combination, but somehow it felt exactly right. The Persistence turned back towards civilized space, carrying 3 survivors who had waited longer than anyone thought possible. And in its databanks, it carried the knowledge of a civilization 80,000 years old. The galaxy was about to learn something new about humans, and the humans were about to teach the galaxy something it had forgotten: that sometimes hope is stronger than probability. The news reached station before the Persistence did. The observation drones had transmitted everything: the successful docking, the discovery of survivors, the evacuation, and the impossible rescue. Within hours, every species in the Galactic Council knew that humans had achieved what logic said was impossible. Ambassador Wu was in his quarters when his communication device started receiving messages faster than he could read them. Requests for interviews, demands for explanations, accusations of withholding information. The entire council wanted to know how humans had known the rescue would succeed. The ambassador arrived at his door within the hour, accompanied by a team of crystalline philosophers. They didn't wait for an invitation. They simply entered and filled his modest quarters with refracted light and the sound of stone grinding on stone. "Explain," the ambassador demanded. "What intelligence did your species possess that ours lacked? What calculations did you make that we missed?" Wu set down his tea and considered his answer carefully. The truth was so simple that he knew they wouldn't believe it. "We had no special intelligence. We made no calculations beyond basic navigation and survival probability." "Impossible," one of the philosophers said. "You achieved a statistically improbable outcome. There must have been hidden data, superior analysis, something that gave you confidence of success." "There was nothing," Wu said. "We saw a distress call. We went to answer it, that's all." They stared at him. Their crystalline faces couldn't show emotion the way human faces did, but Wu had learned to read the patterns of light that flickered through their bodies. They were deeply confused. "You risked your ship and crew on possibility alone," another philosopher asked. "No strategic assessment, no resource calculation, no analysis of potential gain." "The potential gain was obvious," Wu said. 3 lives saved. 3 lives of an unknown species from a civilization 80,000 years extinct. Lives with no political value, no resource value, no alliance value. This is what you considered sufficient reward for such risk." Wu felt a flicker of frustration. "Yes, 3 lives, that's everything." The left looking more confused than when they arrived. Over the next several days, similar visits happened. They sent their top probability mathematicians to interview Wu. They presented calculations showing that the rescue should have failed at 17 different points. They wanted to know what factors humans had accounted for that their models missed. "We didn't account for anything," Wu explained patiently. "We knew it was dangerous. We went anyway." "But why?" "Because they needed help." The mathematicians left to recalculate their models. Clearly, they concluded, humans had hidden calculation methods that produced results their species couldn't predict. They would need to study human psychology and decision-making more carefully. The scent and evolutionary psychologists. They wanted to understand how human evolution had produced a species that acted against its own survival instincts. They conducted interviews, ran simulations, and analyzed human history. One scientist presented her findings to Wu. "We believe we understand now," she said, her mandibles clicking excitedly. "Your species evolved something we call weaponized empathy. Where most species develop survival instincts that prioritize self-preservation, humans developed an override system. You can value other lives as much as your own, even across species boundaries." "That doesn't sound like a weapon," Wu said. "It is, though. It's strategically devastating. A species that will risk everything to save strangers creates a galaxy where cooperation becomes mandatory. It forces other species to reconsider their own ethical frameworks. It's brilliant and terrifying." Wu wasn't sure how to respond to being called brilliant and terrifying in the same sentence. "We just help people who need help." "Exactly," the scientist said, as if he'd proven her point. "You do it without thinking. That's what makes it so powerful." Meanwhile, the Persistence was making its way back through the hazardous region. The return journey was harder than the trip out. The ship was overloaded with equipment, the systems were strained from the first passage, and the cosmic anomalies hadn't gotten any friendlier. But one guided them through with the same calm competence she'd shown before. In the medical bay, Sungmin worked constantly to keep the stable. Their biology was nothing like anything he'd studied, but he adapted. He combined human medical knowledge with data from the archives that Bora had recovered. It was experimental and risky, but it was working. The Keeper of Hope grew stronger each day. The other two younger members of their species also began to recover. They were weak, confused, and overwhelmed by the fact that rescue had actually come, but they were alive. One evening, as measured by the ship's artificial cycle, one sat with the Keeper of Hope in the medical bay. The crystalline being had many questions about humanity, about Earth, about the galaxy that had changed so much in 80,000 years. "Do you ever regret coming?" the Keeper asked. "You nearly died several times, your ship is damaged, your crew is exhausted, all this for 3 strangers you'd never met." One thought about it. They'd pushed through gravitational anomalies that had nearly torn them apart. They'd survived a journey that had killed stronger ships. They'd risked everything on the slim chance that survivors remained after 80. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret it. If anything, I'd regret not coming more." "Why?" "Because you waited. You kept hopping for 80,000 years. Someone needed to show up for that. Someone needed to prove that hope wasn't wasted." The Keeper's light pulsed in patterns that suggested deep thought. "My species evolved on a harsh world. Survival meant cold calculation. Emotion was inefficient. Hope was dangerous because it interfered with logical decision-making. We sent our distress call because it was statistically rational. There was a small chance of rescue, which was better than certain death. But we never expected anyone to actually come. We thought we understood probability." "And now," one asked. "Now I understand that probability doesn't account for everything. There are species in this galaxy that calculate differently, that value different things, that will cross impossible distances because someone asked for help." One smiled. "I'll tell you a secret, most species don't think like us. The Council thought we were crazy to come after you. They're still trying to figure out why we did it." "What will you tell them?" "The truth, that you needed help and we could provide it. That's reason enough." Back on station, the Council convened an emergency session. The Persistence would arrive in 2 days, bringing survivors from a civilization 80,000 years old. This was unprecedented in galactic history. They needed to decide how to respond. They presented their analysis. Humans represent a significant unknown variable in galactic civilization. Their decision-making processes don't align with established models. They operate on what we can only describe as irrational altruism. "Is this a threat?" someone asked. "We don't know. They're unpredictable. They take actions that shouldn't make sense. But the results speak for themselves. They succeeded where we said they would fail. They offered a different perspective. We believe humans are operating on longer time horizons than we initially understood. Their altruism isn't irrational, it's strategic. By building a galaxy where helping others is normal, they create better outcomes for everyone over extended time periods. It's still illogical by our standards, but there's an internal consistency to it. They were more pragmatic. Whatever their motivations, humans now have a relationship with a species with 80,000 years of knowledge. The technological and scientific value is enormous. Whether they planned it or not, they've gained a significant advantage. Wu listened to the debate from the human section. They were all trying to understand human motivation through their own frameworks. None of them quite got it. They couldn't accept that sometimes. Humans just helped people because it was the right thing to do. When the session opened for comments, Wu stood. With respect to all the distinguished representatives and their theories, I'd like to tell you a story from Earth. The council quieted. The new species rarely spoke, and when they did, it was often confusing. On Earth, we have people who climb mountains, Wu began. Very tall, very dangerous mountains. Sometimes climbers get in trouble. When that happens, other climbers go to rescue them. They leave their own climbs, risk their own lives, and climb into danger to save strangers. When asked why, they say, because they needed help. He paused, looking around the chamber at dozens of species trying to process this information. We have coast guards who sail into storms to rescue sinking ships. We have firefighters who run into burning buildings to save people they've never met. We have doctors who travel to dangerous places to treat patients who can't pay them. This isn't unusual for humans. This is just what we do. The council was silent. You're trying to understand our logic, Wu continued. You're searching for hidden motivations, strategic calculations, evolutionary advantages. But the truth is simpler than you think. We help because someone needs help. That's all. That's everything. The ambassador spoke carefully. But surely you must understand this is inefficient. Resources spent on strangers are resources not spent on your own species. Maybe, Wu acknowledged. But we'd rather live in a galaxy where people help each other than one where everyone calculates their own advantage. He sat down. The council continued to debate, but something had shifted. They were starting to understand that humans really were different, and that difference wasn't a trick or a strategy. It was simply who humans were. The persistence would arrive soon, and the galaxy would have to adjust to a species that didn't operate by the old rules. The persistence docked at station to an unprecedented gathering. The main bay was filled with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Medical teams stood ready with specialized equipment. Scientists waited with scanning devices. Diplomats prepared speeches. And security forces stood by, though no one was quite sure what they were securing against. One stood on her ship's bridge and looked at the crowd through the viewport. "Well," she said to her crew, "I guess we're famous now." "I preferred being unknown," Bora muttered, but she was smiling. The docking process was careful and slow. They needed to be transferred to proper medical facilities, quarantine chambers that had been hastily modified to accommodate crystalline biology. Sung Min had worked with council medical experts over communication channels, teaching them everything he'd learned about physiology during the journey back. When the airlock opened, one led her team out first. They were tired, dirty, and their uniforms showed signs of the hard journey, but they walked with quiet pride. They'd done something impossible, and they'd brought 3 survivors home. The Keeper of Hope followed, moving slowly with Sung Min's assistance. The ancient being's light was stronger now than it had been on the dying station, but still dim compared to what the archives suggested was healthy. The other 2 came next, supported by medical staff. The crowd was silent. Seeing the survivors in person made everything real. These beings had waited 80,000 years for rescue. They had survived longer than most civilizations had existed, and they were here because humans had simply decided to respond to a distress call. Wu stepped forward to greet one. "Captain, welcome back." "Thank you, Ambassador, we brought guests." Keeper of Hope turned to face the assembled council representatives. When it spoke, translation devices across the bay crackled to life, converting its crystalline voice into dozens of languages. "I am called Keeper of Hope by your translation systems. On behalf of my species, what remains of it, I thank you for this welcome. But mostly I thank humanity. They came when logic said they shouldn't. They succeeded when probability said they would fail. They are very strange, and I am grateful for their strangeness." The next several weeks were busy. They were taken to specialized facilities where teams of doctors and scientists worked to restore their health. The council wanted information about technology, about the ancient Ark, about 80,000 years of recorded history that was thought lost. But the Keeper of Hope insisted on something else first. It requested a meeting with only humans present. One, Wu, who traveled from Earth, and several other human representatives gathered in a private chamber. "You came for us," the Keeper said. "You risked everything for strangers you'd never met. By the ethics and calculations of most galactic species, this was irrational, but I wish to offer you something." From a container, carefully transported from the Persistence, the Keeper produced a data storage device of design. "This contains our archives, 80,000 years of science, art, philosophy, and history, technologies that your council would take centuries to rediscover, maps of regions they've never explored, knowledge from an era when the galaxy was younger and civilizations thought differently." "That's extremely generous," De said carefully. "What do you want in return?" The Keeper's light pulsed in patterns that might have been amusement. "I wish for you to teach us." "Teach you what?" Wu asked, confused. "How to hope without calculation, how to help without measuring reward, how to persist when logic says to quit. My species evolved on a harsh world where survival meant cold efficiency. We learned to calculate everything, measure everything, optimize everything. But in 80,000 years of waiting, I learned something. Calculation alone is not enough. There are things in this universe that cannot be measured, and sometimes the most logical choice is the wrong one." The Keeper moved closer to them, its light growing brighter. "You responded to our call when every calculation said you shouldn't. You risked your ship and crew on the slim chance that we still lived. You crossed impossible distances because someone asked for help. This is not calculation. This is something else. Something my species lost or never had. I wish to learn it, to carry it forward into whatever future the might have." One smiled. "You don't need to trade ancient knowledge for that. We'll teach you anyway." "Why?" "Because you asked, and because we can." The Keeper was silent for a moment. Then its light pulsed in patterns that the translation device struggled with before settling on. "I am beginning to understand why you did what you did. It still doesn't make logical sense, but I think I like it." The news of the archives spread quickly through the council. The technological and scientific value was enormous, knowledge from a civilization that had existed before most current species had evolved. Several council members approached Wu, offering trade agreements, alliance proposals, and requests for access to the data. Wu listened politely to each offer. Then he explained that humans would be sharing the knowledge freely with any species that wanted it. There would be no trade agreements, no political conditions, no strategic advantages sought. The ambassador confronted him about this. "You could leverage this information for enormous gain. Your species could advance centuries ahead of others. Why would you simply give it away?" "Because it doesn't belong to us," Wu said. "It belongs to and they've chosen to share it freely. We're just helping them do that." "But you rescued them. By any reasonable standard, you've earned rights to their technology." "We didn't rescue them for rewards," Wu said patiently. "We rescued them because they needed help. Anything else would feel like we'd been paid for basic decency." The concept still didn't translate well. But slowly, across the council, something began to shift. Several species started reviewing their own policies on distress calls and rescue operations. They established a new philosophical study group focused on non-calculated altruism. They began running simulations where they factored in irrational compassion as a positive variable. Even the most pragmatic of all species quietly updated their rescue protocols. When asked why, their representative said simply, "The humans may be onto something. It's inefficient and illogical, but the results are difficult to argue with." 6 months after the persistence returned, the first joint human settlement was established on a frontier world. The planet was beautiful but undeveloped, rolling hills, clean water, and atmosphere suitable for both species with minor adjustments. One had requested the assignment and was leading the integration team. Bora was there, of course, working on infrastructure that combined human and technology. Yang served as the primary liaison, his translation skills refined by months of working with the Keeper of Hope. Sungmin established the settlement's medical center, training in both human and crystalline biology. The settlement wasn't large, a few hundred humans and the 3 surviving, plus others who joined from curiosity or idealism. But it represented something new in the galaxy, a community built not on trade agreements or political alliances, but on the simple idea that different species could help each other for no reason beyond it being the right thing to do. The Keeper of Hope spent its days working with human teachers, learning what it called the art of hopeful action. It was a slow process. 80,000 years of calculating probability couldn't be unlearned quickly, but the Keeper was patient and humans were good teachers. One evening, one found the Keeper standing alone, looking up at the stars. She joined it quietly. "Do you ever wonder," the Keeper asked, "if there are others out there, other civilizations that sent distress calls that were never answered, other species that waited as long as we did but weren't as fortunate?" "Yes," one said honestly, "I think about it." "What will you do about it?" One smiled. "What we always do, keep listening, keep watching, and if we hear another call, we'll respond." The Keeper's light pulsed warmly. "Your species is very strange, but I think the galaxy needed strange. It needed someone to show that compassion is not weakness, that hope is not foolishness, that sometimes the most logical thing to do is ignore logic and help someone who asks." Back on station, Wu received an interesting report. Deep space listening posts across the galaxy had detected something unusual. Old distress calls, some hundreds of years old, some thousands, were being reactivated. Automated systems that had been dormant were powering up, sending their signals out into the void again. It was as if the galaxy itself was waking up, as if species long thought extinct or forgotten were reminding the universe that they were still there, still waiting, still hoping that someone might hear them. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to discuss these signals. The debate was familiar: risk assessment, resource calculation, probability analysis. Most species came to the same conclusions they always had. The risks were too great, the chances of finding survivors too small. The logical choice was to do nothing. But something was different this time. Several species paused before voting. They looked at the human section of the council, where Wu sat calmly, waiting. "What will humanity do?" the ambassador asked, though it already knew the answer. "We'll investigate the signals," Wu said. "We'll send ships to check. If there are survivors, we'll bring them home." Even though it's illogical, even though probability says most of these calls are from dead civilizations. Yes, even though. There was quiet for a moment. Then, "The conclave would like to participate in this effort. We wish to send observers, perhaps to learn from your methods." Other species joined in. They offered navigational support. They provided detailed maps of unexplored regions. Slowly, awkwardly, the Council began to coordinate rescue operations that would have been unthinkable a year ago. They were learning, Wu realized. Learning that sometimes you help people not because it benefits you, but because they need help. Learning that compassion isn't a weakness to be exploited, but a strength to be cultivated. Learning that the youngest species in the council might have something to teach the eldest. 3 months later, a dozen ships left from various council ports. Human vessels, explorers, scouts, and others. Each one headed toward a different distress call, a different set of coordinates, a different long shot at finding someone still alive and waiting. The crews knew the risks. They knew the odds. They knew that most of these missions would find nothing but empty stations and dead civilizations. But they went anyway because someone had asked for help, and that was enough. On the joint settlement, one stood with the Keeper of Hope and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, those ships were searching. Somewhere out there, other survivors might be waiting, keeping hope alive against all probability. "Your species has changed the galaxy," the Keeper said quietly. "We just answered a distress call," one replied. "Anyone could have done it." "But they didn't, you did. That's what makes the difference." The Keeper's light pulsed in patterns that one had learned meant contentment. After 80,000 years of waiting, after giving up hope and finding it again, the ancient being had finally found peace. Not because it was rescued, but because it had learned something new, that in a universe of cold calculation, there were still species who operated on warmth, who helped because they could, who responded because someone asked. And slowly, carefully, that warmth was spreading. The galaxy was learning that there was more than one way to calculate worth, more than one way to measure success, more than one way to be civilized. Sometimes the most advanced species weren't the ones with the best technology or the longest history. Sometimes they were just the ones who showed up when someone needed help. The galaxy had received a signal 80,000 years old, and humans had simply responded. Now the galaxy was learning to respond too.